Back in 2005 when Shadow the Hedgehog was released, I had the same bad opinion of the game that I'm sure a lot of people had back then and probably still do today. I thought it was just another Sonic game, but one that would be forgotten sooner than later. Many years after the game initially came out though, and my gaming skills and knowledge had gone full pro, I realized that there was much more to this game than I originally gave it credit for, and that I was finally breaking away from the lukewarm reviews critics gave it and how disappointed and confused the people who originally played it were. Shadow the Hedgehog is by no means my favorite Sonic game, however that doesn't make it a bad game or one that I didn't enjoy playing through. To take a character like Shadow, who players only know very little about from the previous two games he was featured in, and make him the center of his own game where he too is trying to find out about himself makes for such a great concept and a journey that the player and Shadow can go on together. Shadow is such a dark and mysterious character that by adding that level of grit to a game without making it too scary or stray away from the core of Sonic too much makes it an enjoyable experience and definitely a nice change from the decades-old Sonic Defeats Eggman game. Initially, the game isn't something you'd expect Sonic Team to put their name on because Shadow's main combat isn't the homing attack, but guns. Guns he can find on the ground or in boxes, or guns that he can take from the Black Arms aliens or, yes, human gun soldiers. And I want to be clear, Shadow the Hedgehog was never intended to be classified as a shooter game. While guns are the main form of combat, I would consider them more of an accessory to the overall gameplay itself, which still requires you to run fast and platform your way through stages and obstacles. The homing attack is still a thing, and there are even some missions where you simply search for items and don't even need guns to get through it. While the inclusion of guns initially raised eyebrows, again, this is Shadow we're talking about, not Sonic himself, and the usage of them is not to that level of a real shooter game, so I don't think people should flip out about it as much as they usually do. Maybe it's more the fact that you're like attacking humans, but it's not very realistic, meaning that they don't die, and again, it's not like this is Sonic doing this, and murdering is not a key story element. The main focus of the story of the game, however, is that Shadow doesn't know for sure who he is, and he's trying to get answers about his past and gets manipulated by his allies and foes along his journey, where it is then up to the player to decide which path Shadow should choose by completing one of 3 accompanying missions for each stage. The hero path would often feature Sonic and friends trying to convince Shadow to destroy the Black Arms aliens in the level, while the dark path would partner Shadow up with Doomseye or Eggman, in which Shadow would have to eliminate gun soldiers. There is also a neutral path in which Shadow could simply take to the goal ring to finish the stage. Every stage was slightly varied in terms of exact missions and featured a wide variety of accompanying characters, with a whole lot of dialogue in each level, which is really fluid and adds to the intensity of whichever level you're playing. Within each level, you can switch between the 2 characters who are trying to convince you to complete their mission. Every time you played the story mode, the player had a choice of which path they wanted to choose, and depending on that choice would determine which stages and bosses you would progress to throughout your journey through one story run of the game. This had to be completed multiple times in order to unlock all the stages in the game, with each level being a different environment from the last and missions that change depending on your path, so in terms of variety it definitely mixes it up. When playing through the story this way, it really extends the life of the game and prevents you from easily completing it within a couple hours on account of every path needing to be taken at one point or another. Again, a very unique mechanic to the Sonic series that we haven't seen since this game, and with no character better fitting it than Shadow. By the way, the cutscenes look great in this game, they animate really well and the dubbing is exceptionally well done. In addition to modes available at the start of the game, there's also a secret mode only accessible as a reward after obtaining all 71A ranks in the game. It's called Expert Mode, which is a harder playthrough of the entire game, from the first stage Westopolis all the way to the last way. However, this time if you lose all your lives at any point in the playthrough, you'll have to start back at Westopolis again. To my surprise, this mode actually intensified as I went through it, but once you figure out the best way to grind for lives, the game's risk wavers quite a lot. In each level, the different characters who joined you in the main story of the game present level objectives and other little tidbits of dialogue to inform the player that Shadow is going through some kind of training. I thought this unique dialogue was there to suggest there was going to be a big payoff or some kind of exclusive reward for completing Expert Mode. However, upon completing it, absolutely nothing happened. I do find this very disappointing, at least they could have given me a thanks for playing screen. Aside from both story mode and stage select mode, there's also a 2-player battle mode. Here you can choose from 6 different shadows. It's amusing for a few minutes, but with no real objective other than to KO your opponent who can constantly and easily stay alive with one ring, it doesn't really get anywhere. This is the only reason where I could see people complaining about the shooting mechanics of the game. But if you're going to versus mode in hopes of a great first-person shooter experience, this game was not built to expect that. Again, it's fun, but only for a few minutes. Despite my ending complaints, I do think that the enjoyment and depth that this game has to it definitely outweighs any unappeal, and I can't really see why people hate on this game so much. At the end of the day, it was the way that this game made me like Shadow as a character so much more than I previously had, and in any other kind of context it wouldn't have been the same game. The interaction between the different allegiances in the game and the vulnerability that Shadow faces enhances the internal struggle that urges him to pursue the answers about who he truly is, which in my opinion is such a manipulation only Shadow could personify. And through this embodiment does the game truly capture a feeling unlike any Sonic game before.